You know, it feels right now that in our society, everything is coming apart at the seams. And it might. It's not a given that America will hold together. It's not a given that a society as luxurious and blessed as what we have enjoyed here in Western civilization will hold together. Most of human history is not a story where a majority of people live in peace and prosperity, but most of human history is people being ruled by a minority band of tyrants who inflict misery on the masses. But that doesn't mean we should lose hope, but it means we have to have a realistic view of the world. That's what I want to talk to you about today. I want us to talk about truth, meaning, some tactics we can employ to really hold our society accountable and to look forth towards a common vision of the good. And if you're someone interested in truth, meaning, you're interested in the deeper things of life that bring joy, join me in this conversation and look to some of the things that I'm saying. Look in your own personal life and see how we can put together a common plan to push back against the chaos in our world. I know very often people look at the destructive things going on in our world and they see how it gets taken up for by different people. They don't want to admit that there's a lot of destructive forces in the world. And many people, they say, well, I didn't realize that this would take hold in our society. I didn't think people would get this far. You know, wait till they come out into the rural areas and then it'll all stop. I know a lot of people are wondering, you know, what is the right combination of buttons that will be pushed where righteous people in America will stand up to say no to it. And the unfortunate truth I have to say to you is the biblical truth. There is not a right combination of tyranny, of buttons pushed, that will sanctify a people. And what I mean by saying that is there's not a right amount of tyranny, destruction, chaos that will move a people to rise up out of the chaos themselves and fight back against it and win. The only way that people can fight against great evils is if they are standing on something that is a holy and righteous vision. The only way people can affect such a great change is if they are principled on something which moves them to be crusaders for their cause. The other day I shared an example with a friend of mine who was really frustrated by the protests and the riots going on in America, and he said, you know, when are people going to stand up and say no to this? And I said, it's kind of like a dog that's on a property. If a band of robbers come and they take over the property, and the dog doesn't initially bite back. You know, if they have already taken everything they want from the house, and they're kind of upset that the dog hasn't fought them back, they can actually come to the dog and corner the dog and force him to bite. And a cornered dog can be quite a vicious beast. You can get a dog to do some serious damage if you force him to bite you. But if it has taken cornering the dog to make the dog react, then there's nothing virtuous going on. The robbers have already succeeded in taking over everything. We have to understand that it takes more than just looking at destruction to sanctify people. It takes more than being a victim of something to know how to overcome it. That's something that's not very popular to say in our modern day and age. You know, a lot of times people who are victims of terrible evil, they go on to perpetuate those same evils when they're older. Experiencing something tragic and unfortunate in life doesn't make you an expert about the subject, and it doesn't make you someone who's inclined to stop it either. In fact, very often people who experience things, they go on to perpetuate those things. It's a tragedy of fallen creation. It takes something holy and righteous to transform people. When we look at our world right now, there is a lot of lying and bearing of false witness that goes on, and nobody's ever held accountable for it. And I've said many times here in the recent days, you know, we've got to start holding people accountable based on principles, not on laws. And what I'm advocating for is not lawlessness, but the ultimate lawfulness. Because laws, they're downstream from virtues. And in our world right now, a lot of our lawmakers, a lot of our courts, they have been corrupted by idolatry. They're not interested in pursuing truth. And they won't be held accountable through their own means. They're not going to allow themselves to be held accountable that way. So we have to make moral and principled stands. You know, look throughout Scripture. Jesus, the early church, they do not involve themselves in pagan orgies, even though there were laws in Rome that required you to do so if you lived in Rome's territories. And of course, you can look throughout the Old Testament. Moses, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel, is time and time again you find there's a righteous reason to look beyond laws. And we as the people of God, we're going to have to stop listening to the words that come out of others' mouths. Even sometimes in the church, we find people who are interested only in bearing false witness, and one of the chief tactics of doing this is to call yourself something other than what you are. And that's very destructive. We have to look at the fruits that are produced by people and by actions and movements. But also we're going to have to start supplying people with real, deep meaning, and that can only come from God. In our world right now, the chaos is eating our culture, and it has been able to do this because we have been separated from meaning. We've been separated from true principles. We've been separated from the virtues of God that God desired us to be in connection with. In our public sphere, it's been impermissible for someone to speak of God. You have to only work within technicalities. And we've had a lot of lies promulgate this. People will say, well, you can't have a prayer at a public school because that breaks the separation of church and state. Well, actually, no. The First Amendment says Congress shall not make a law regarding the establishment of a religion. And, well, somebody praying at school is not making a law regarding establishment of religion. I'm sorry, it's just not. That's not how the English language works. That's not what those words mean. But we have allowed people to take things to a very serious extent where they are advocating their belief system using our public sphere, using our courts, using our institutions, even our schools. And we as the church, we're going to have to start standing up against this because everything will collapse if we don't. We have to realize that just as Pennywise the Clown from the Stephen King novel It, he sautés his victims by having them instilled with fear, our young people today have been sautéed to be consumed by the evils of our modern age by robbing them of meaning. Giving young people participation trophies, saying they need to be affirmed for who they are, and never calling them to virtue, that is not what God desires us to do. I love there in the Gospel of Matthew, you get an account of when Matthew himself is called by Jesus. And something phenomenal happens. Jesus comes and he sees a man called Matthew. And in that, through the true biblical understanding of this, you find something unique. Jesus cares about Matthew as an individual, not as a tax collector, not as a member of some tribe, but as a man called Matthew. Something you won't ever see Pharaoh do. You'll never see Caesar in Rome do that. You really won't ever see a King David or King Solomon do that. But he's not doing what our modern day and age either would do. Our modern day and age would say, I see you as a man called Matthew, therefore you're good enough just as being Matthew. Well, the thing is, when Jesus sees Matthew, he commands him to follow him. Matthew must have a total change in his life in order to pursue the holy virtues of God. For him to pursue holiness and excellence and to be restored to who he needs to be, he has to completely change his life. Yes, Jesus did care about a man called Matthew. He didn't have to have anything special about him for Jesus to love him. But for him to become a Christian, for him to become someone who is truly saved, who is redeemed and restored, then he's going to have to quit being a tax collector. And in life, there are a lot of things that we find naturally desirable that are sinful. There are a lot of things we find naturally desirable that are actually good because we are created in the image of God. And our modern world has come to confuse these things. I also find it fascinating there in the book of Nehemiah that Sanballat and Tobiah, they want to destroy the people of God by adding confusion. And our world has been very effective in doing this. So in wrapping up this message, I want us to see clearly what God has in store for us and not be distracted by the chaos of the world. And if that means we need to turn off the news, maybe we need to turn off the news. But we need to be looking for the beauty and the truth of God and not just our modern day and age. So with that, God love you and have a blessed day.